I never intended to get Destiny 2, but when I upgraded to a PS4 Pro, the deluxe edition of the game came with it. I went into it with an open mind, having not played the original Destiny, or even knowing that much about it. All I knew was that it was a massive multiplayer shooter that received mixed reactions from critics and fans. Destiny 2 was thought to improve upon some of those more frustrating aspects featured in Destiny. After about 20 hours playing, I have mixed feelings about it also. On one hand, it can be exhilarating, with its immersive and extremely fast-paced gameplay. On the other hand, it all feels really repetitive and pretty much futile. There's definitely a lot to take in, so let's get right to it. So after a cutscene giving you some insight to what happened in the first Destiny, you start by creating your character. You choose between three classes, Titan, Hunter, and Warlock, with each having their own unique characteristics and abilities. I chose Titan because I thought they looked the best, but after playing multiplayer and seeing the other classes at work, I'm curious to replay the game with the other two. The character customization is a bit lacking, with very limited presets to choose from, and not a whole lot of variation. After this, you are immediately thrown into the story, which took me about 9 hours to complete, although I did spend some of that time doing side quests that don't add much to the progression. Now, like I said before, I didn't play Destiny at all, and as a result, I had no idea what was going on. So I recommend brushing up on your Destiny backstory before picking this thing up. Although I have to say, after playing through the entire main campaign for 9 hours, I still really had no idea what was going on. Something about a traveler that gets destroyed, this guy Gaul is evil, you're a guardian and you need light from the traveler, this girl and this guy are your friends, this guy's supposed to be really funny even though I didn't laugh at any of his jokes, this thing is a ghost and it follows you around, although it never helps you in combat, which is aggravating. So you're left for dead, and with the help of your ghost, you build yourself back up and fight your way back to your friends Zavala, Ikora, Cade, and those other people, I can't think of their names. Along the way, you do a little of this, do a little of that, I don't know. Honestly, the story isn't very compelling. I never really cared about what was going on, I wasn't fully invested in the Guardians' cause, and I wasn't really worried about any of the characters living or dying. I really just waited out the cutscenes so I could get to the next gameplay portion. So first, let me get into the aesthetics. The graphics are appealing, and the game looks really good in a 4K HDR display, with vibrant colors, a wide color gamut, and an attractive color palette. The music definitely stands out. It's impossible to ignore, but not always in a good way. While at times the soundtrack accompanies the gameplay in epic fashion, other times it can be ubiquitous and cloying. The animations are smooth and the movements are reliable. Characters do suffer a bit from Mass Effect Andromeda syndrome as there's not much life in the eyes. The voice acting though is spot on. For me, the most impressive feature is the sound design. Every weapon has unique, exciting sounds that dominate combat. There are some animation glitches, but not a whole lot. And I did hard crash twice on the PS4. Other gameplay mechanics include the double jump and gliding, which will need to be used during some light platforming sections. You progress your character by gaining XP and leveling up, which grants new perks and abilities. Once you progress to a certain point by completing particular missions, you get the opportunity to visit the Shard of the Traveler and gain a new subclass. The most important measure of your skill is the power attribute, which is raised by equipping better armor and weapons. Certain areas of the game cannot be accessed until you reach a certain level of power, which can be extremely annoying because this depends on the type of loot you find while playing the game. But I'll get into all that, specifically loot, a little later on. Some of the campaign is open to multiplayer, so you can actually be helped out by, or help other players, which I think is pretty cool. Public events are also very fun social challenges that you can use to progress your character, with the Walker Sentinel one being my personal favorite. Now, the combat in the game can be very engaging. It's pretty much a constant barrage of a variety of enemies. In combat, you have an energy weapon, kinetic weapon, power weapon, and your melee attacks, the latter of which being my favorite way to play. The enemies don't always have the best AI. A lot of times they sort of just stand around and wait for you to kill them. But there's often so many of them trying to kill you at the same time that it's negligible. Killing enemies grants you XP, and enemies drop ammo and loot that you can use to build up your character. Over time, and increasing with your performance, you gain light that when full can unleash your special ability. The absolute best sections for me are when you are completely surrounded by enemies, near the brink of death, and you unleash your special ability to destroy everyone in sight. Seeing as this game is driven by co-op, let's talk about the multiplayer. The Crucible is the first area you will have access to, and I played about 2 hours in the beginning, earning the Call to Arms achievement from Shaxx. It's 4v4 with respawns spread out across 3 different modes. Clash, which is just straight up head-to-head, Control, which is basically capture the flag, and Supremacy, which is like Clash, but you have to secure your enemies and fallen teammates' crests when they die. It's pretty fun. Like I said, I played for a couple hours and really enjoyed it. The locations are varied, with each map having its own unique layout, and the respawn points are fair, so you don't spawn next to enemies and immediately die. As the days went out, Bungie started rolling out strikes and raids, but again, you have to be a certain level of power in order to access them, and as a result, I only attempted the Vanguard strike, in which 2 other players join you and you have to defeat a boss. Now I have to get into loot. I alluded to it earlier and would be remiss if I didn't mention it. Certain areas require high levels of power in order to be accessible, and that power is directly linked to the equipment that you have on. The game deals out common, rare, legendary, and exotic items, which can be obtained through regular gameplay, decrypting engrams, or of course, buying them with real money. Now the problem starts setting in. Bungie and Activision obviously saw this as an opportunity to cash out and require players to spend real money on items, or silver, which can be taken to an NPC and in turn grants you said items. Well, I've played for over 20 hours and only found 4 exotic items. I have a 5th, the Cold Heart rifle, that came as a result of buying the game. Without buying new items with real money, I've pretty much capped at 230 power. Not saying this is the case for everyone, I'm sure others can progress without it. So of course, the developers wave microtransactions in your face as a way of suggesting that you can buy your way into a better experience, which is ridiculous. $60 should be enough to get the experience you want, but when greed sets in, all bets are off. But I think the biggest problem with the game is that when I think about it, it's actually pretty pointless. You play, progress your character, gain loot, get power, and once your power is high enough to be fiercely competitive, you can play, progress your character, gain loot, get power, and once your power is high enough to be fiercely competitive, you can play, progress your character, gain loot. You see where I'm going with this? Completing the main story is definitely not fulfilling. There's really no payoff, no climax. You just pick right back up and gain access to higher areas of competition. But even when you're successful in those areas, your reward is to progress your character, gain loot, and get higher power. Once you realize this is the main objective, you feel compelled to reach some unattainable level of power, which drives you to repeat this endless cycle. Now factor in the microtransactions. Well, which is easier, the endless grind to gain loot that will make your character the ultimate guardian badass, or going to the PlayStation or Microsoft store and purchasing the items you need for a price? Because that's what's going to fulfill you, the ultimate badass guardian capable of competing in the most difficult circumstances. It's certainly not the low-stakes story, but that's the only other option in the game. There's the massive multiplayer elements and the campaign. Of course, Bungie will be releasing 2 expansions and tons of DLC, but guess what? You have to pay for all that content. And here we are, back in microtransactions, which you will buy because you want more gameplay, but you will have to endlessly grind away to make those expansions satisfying, which requires more microtransactions, which you will use to play the expansions that you just bought, hence the endless, pointless cycle, all while the developers are swimming in your cash. The more I think about it, this game is not a full game. It itself feels like one massive expansion on top of another. They're basically selling the game in pieces. Unfortunately, this is the state of gaming today, and this trend of cashing out on players is definitely not going away. Still, I can't deny that while I was playing the game, I enjoyed it. Its berserker-like combat elements and pleasing aesthetics made me want to keep going. To a point. I was on the fence for a long time about my final score. I really wanted to give it a 7 because, like I said, I liked playing it. It was fun, engaging, and entertaining. But it just doesn't feel like a complete game worthy of $60. So with that said, my final score for Destiny 2 is a 6 out of 10. If you don't mind the endless grind of playing for hours upon hours to progress to a point that you can play with the best of the best, you'll appreciate this game. You also appreciate it if you're like me and love intense multiplayer combat shooters with pleasing aesthetics. But do not buy this game for its story. You will be sorely disappointed. Hopefully we'll see better things from these developers, as they definitely have something good to build upon, but they still have some work to do. Please feel free to comment below and tell me if you like Destiny 2 and what you thought about this review. And as always, thanks for watching.